a little late, but we'll make up the time along the way.
Just talk slightly faster.
I will talk slightly faster, and please, someone remind me when we're coming up on at least 10 minutes before, okay? 10 minutes before we're supposed to end, okay?
Okay, no problem. I'm
ready?
next, so
Okay.
I talk fast. So.
Okay, I'm going to stand here to do this one because I really need to see my slides and I can't see them on here. All right, so this is a minor update to the roadmap presentation that I did at Warpstock Europe this year, just a few months ago. I've inserted some additional slides that we're going to cover early on that deal with what ArcaOS does in the ArcaOS/OS2 ecosystem versus what we would like to see third parties do. And hopefully that'll bring some clarity because we get some interesting questions from time to time that aren't really directly in our wheelhouse. And I'm just going to try to bring things into better focus. So you've heard me discuss this before, what we term a major release, a minor release, and a bug fix release. So our current ArcaOS for the 5.0 major minor release is 5.0.8. I don't know if there will be a 5.0.9, but we're fully prepared to build one should the need arise for one. Remember what bug fixes are and maintenance releases. If there's something that we can't really address with a downloadable package and it really requires a new ISO, then we'll spin a new maintenance release. Something in the installer, some bug that's been brought to our attention that may even be almost an edge case, but affect enough users that we think that it would be beneficial, then we'll just release another ISO. And as long as you've got support for 5.0, you'll be able to download that 5.0 dot whatever bug fix release. The current 5.1 release is 5.1.0, and 5.1 will follow the same release cycle as 5.0, so we're going to have 5.1.1, then 5.1.2, 5.1.3 perhaps. 5.1.1 is the release that is upcoming. I do not know when we will hit 5.2. Depends upon what we have to put into it. There are differences between updates and upgrades. So updates, if you have a license for a particular major minor revision, 5.0, let's say, with renewed support, then you will always be able to download the latest 5.0 ISO. 5.0.8 is the latest one. So if you got your 5.0.3 ArcaOS license and you renewed that and renewed that, then you would be able, if it's still current, you would be able to download 5.0.8. If you upgrade your license, this is the important thing. If you upgrade your license from 5.0 to 5.1, and we release an update to 5.0, whether it's a new ISO or it's an update to a component that is only relevant to 5.0, you will not see that in your download center, because you now have switched over from 5.0 to 5.1. Now, why did that happen? Well, it happened mainly because when we sell a new ArcaOS license, we bundle with that a new Warp 4 license. When you upgrade that license, you get the upgrade at a steep discount. Why? Because you're not getting another Warp 4 license. You already have a Warp 4 license with your 5.0 ArcaOS license. So as a result, you have one Warp 4 license, and you've now converted that from ArcaOS 5 to ArcaOS 5.1. So as far as we're concerned, you have one valid license for ArcaOS, and that happens to be 5.1. So you won't see your 5.0 updates. If you have multiple systems, and you want to keep some of them on 5.0 and be able to update them to the latest 5.0, for some reason not upgrading them to 5.1, then instead of upgrading all of your 5.0 licenses, upgrade whatever 5.0 licenses you feel are necessary for the systems you want to upgrade, and keep your 5.0 licenses for the systems that are still running 5.0. Then you will see updates in your download center for both 5.0 and 5.1. But once you upgrade your last 5.0 license, no more 5.0 updates.
And you can't buy them anymore. You can't buy them anymore.
You cannot buy a new 5.0 license from us. You can renew your 5.0 support and maintenance if you already have it.
Yeah.
But once you let it lapse, you can do a late renewal on it, but you can't, unless you're a commercial customer, an enterprise client of ours, with 5.0 licenses already, we will not generate any new 5.0 licenses. Commercial clients are different because they upgrade on a different cycle than most users. So I don't want to say to a commercial client who's got 800 5.0 licenses, oh, you're deploying another 50 workstations? Well, you're going to have to upgrade those to 5.1. And they say, well, everything's 5.0. We don't want to have 5.0 and 5.1. Are you telling us we have to upgrade everything to 5.1? No, we're not going to do that. But for small users, non-commercial users, personal license users, no more 5.0 licenses are available. Matt, you had a
It seems
question?
like, this is just a comment, it seems like a good, emphasis on the notion of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So 5.0 is working for the commercial customer. I think just stay with that.
That's pretty much it. And 5.1, for commercial customers, 5.1 is needed when the hardware changes and requires the support provided in 5.1. For one of our large clients, there's a series of systems in the infrastructure, bare metal systems, that are being upgraded. And the new Lenovo small form factor machines are UEFI only. I can't boot them with CSM reliably and run 5.0. It doesn't work. So although the rest of their VMs are running 5.0 because that works fine for a virtual machine, these systems have to be 5.1, period. That's the end of the story. Otherwise, though, they wouldn't be going to 5.1. They would be getting 5.0 so that their infrastructure was consistent across the enterprise. But a lot of people, not a lot, but a few people have said, what happened to my 5.0 updates? And I say to them, you upgraded to 5.1. Why do you need 5.0 updates?
Right.
Do you need 5.0 updates because you had your one 5.0 license and you installed it on 15 machines? And you want to update the other 14 that you haven't upgraded to 5.1? Well, I didn't mean to say, yeah, I know you didn't mean to say. I get it. But that's important to remember. There's nothing broken in your download center. If you want an update to a component that came with 5.0 that no longer ships with 5.1 because it's been replaced by something else, and you see an announcement in the blog that we've released an update for that component for 5.0, and then you go to look and it's not there. Well, it's not there because you don't have a license for that software anymore. You upgraded your license, and we thank you very much for upgrading. Likewise, if you have a 5.0 license that you haven't upgraded, and there's a component in 5.1 that is not in 5.0, and we release a blog post that says that we've upgraded that component, you won't see it in your 5.0 listing because it's not a 5.0 specific component. Some things cross over and they're applicable to both versions. So you'll see them whether you have one or the other, or you may see it listed twice because you've got a 5.0 and a 5.1 license, and it's, for instance, a NAPS update. So then you'll see that there's a new version of NAPS available, and it will be listed for 5.0 dot whatever you're using, and it'll be listed for 5.1 dot whatever. And we will continue to release those updates for 5.0. We have no plans whatsoever to orphan support for 5.0. If you want to continue using 5.0, if you have a system that does not require the UEFI support or other new support that's available in 5.1, and you want to keep using 5.0, be our guest. Keep doing it, and you can update you can renew your subscription. Unlike some other software companies, we have no plans to either orphan that ability or to jack the price up on that to make it so uncomfortable as to force you to upgrade the operating system. Now,
Another quick question. So I know you said that the upgrade prices would be lower. Do you have like a special agreement with IBM to do that, or how does that even work? Like, I don't know if that's a question you can answer.
well, yeah, it's a question I can answer. When you purchase a new ArcaOS license, that comes with a Warp 4 license, an SMP kernel license, and ArcaOS wrapped around those two components.
Okay.
So there's a cost to us for the Warp 4 license and the SMP license. You've already met the burden for that cost to us. So when you upgrade, I don't need to sell you yet another Warp 4 license and SMP license. Because from our perspective, you already have those components. Those components haven't changed from 5.0 to 5.1. We are licensing you an upgrade, or I should say we are upgrading your license for the ArcaOS components wrapped around that. So we're able to heavily discount the upgrade since we don't need to sell you a license for the IBM components again. IBM is perfectly fine with that. There is no restriction whatsoever in our ASL that would require us to sell additional licenses for no good reason. So you only need, what we can't do is, we can't have people come to us and say, I have a license for eComStation 1.1. Can I upgrade that to ArcaOS? ArcaOS is an upgrade for eComStation. But we can't sell you an upgrade to ArcaOS from eComStation. They're two different products. And so, although you already have a Warp 4 license, essentially, with eComStation, it's a different license than the Warp 4 license we would include with ArcaOS. So you have to...
Different part number.
Different part number. Yeah, there is a
Different
different
part
part number. Different part number.
Thank you.
Let's see. So these are the new slides that I included in here to try to clarify the line of demarcation between what ArcaOS does and what other developers in the space, other developers and third-party entities, such as Warpstock, NetLabs, Voice, online forums, what those collectively third parties do, separate from what ArcaNoe does. and where ArcaOS responsibilities and focus lie. So what ArcaOS does is we provide a usable OS distribution. That's first and foremost what we do. The focus of ArcaOS is to be installed on industry standard hardware. If you want to install it in a virtual machine, be our guest. Virtual machines are not our main focus, however. If you say, well, I want to be able to install ArcaOS in KVM. I don't know if ArcaOS runs in KVM or not. We don't test it under KVM, and we have no plans to make specific changes to the operating system so that it will run in KVM. That's not our focus. Now, that having been said, we have no specific plans to make changes to the operating system so that it installs and runs properly on every single piece of hardware being produced either. But industry standard bare metal, that's what we're talking about. That's our focus. ArcaOS provides updates to those critical system device drivers to keep the system booting. So if something were to come out, for instance, some security warning about UEFI systems, that all UEFI systems could be vulnerable to attack through this vector, and we had a way of dealing with that with a software change to ArcaOS and our UEFI loader, we would issue an update for that. That's a priority for us. That's what we do. We don't expect NetLabs to come up with a third-party open source solution for that problem. We don't expect another commercial OS2 software vendor, there aren't many left, but a commercial OS2 software vendor, what IBM used to refer to as ISVs, independent software vendors, to come up with a solution to that problem. It's our operating system, and if that should come out, we consider that to be part of the base operating system. We would fix that. We would provide a fix for that to the best of our ability. And, of course, our other focus is to create new drivers so that as new things become available and become popular, the operating system will continue to remain relevant. Because as we all know, if you don't have drivers for the hardware, not much else matters. Now, it's very, very important. The wording on the title of this set of slides is critical that everyone understands what I'm saying. And I'm saying this, I'm speaking mainly to our non-native English-speaking audience when I say this. What I mean by these slides are these are the things that ArcaOS is not in a position to do for one reason or another. We're a small company, we have limited manpower, we have limited resources. We have to focus that manpower that we have and the resources that we have on the things that we do from the previous slide. These are the things that we would hope that others would do. So we hope that others will develop, support, and maintain new end-user applications, such as the Office Suite, OpenOffice, develop new web browsers. Paul Smedley is working on a Qt6 port right now, and
Who is?
Paul Smedley,
Paul.
yeah, and Qt6 builds of Drupal. That's the Qt6 development project is not an ArcaOS project. Drupal, the Drupal web browser is not an ArcaOS project. When there is a stable alternative to our aging Firefox and SeaMonkey, we will be happy to include it in our distribution. But we are not in the process of developing a browser. We realize that a browser is critical software for the operating system, because otherwise you have a ratchet handle without a socket. I get that. But we're in the business of making ratchet handles. We're not in the business of forging sockets. If we were to stop forging ratchet handles and switch over to forging sockets, if we were to stop developing ArcaOS so that we could shift our focus entirely to doing web browsers, we would risk the operating system falling into disrepair as a result of our shift in focus. And that is definitely not going to happen. We don't exist to teach new users how to use OS 2. When you go to an automobile dealership to buy a car, they expect that you know how to drive. They do not expect the salesman to take you out every day and give you driving lessons. Now, I know that may sound kind of harsh, but if you don't know how to operate your computer, and I'm not talking about special features of OS 2. We do our best to document features and techniques and tips in our wiki. But if you don't know anything about computer operating systems, why on earth are you buying a computer operating system license? I mean, seriously, you can get a computer with a preloaded operating system and just use that. But if you are savvy enough to say, you know, I don't want to use this operating system that came bundled with my computer from a particular company located in Redmond, Washington, in the United States. I want to use something that doesn't phone home every time I turn the computer on and send all of my private information back to Sven somewhere, or put it in the cloud. Which cloud? You've obviously got some grasp of what's going on. So please put your head in the game and learn how to use OS 2. There are third parties that will help you with that. Voice Virtual OS 2 International Consumer Education, Warpstock, the Warp group on groups.io if you prefer mailing lists to forums. The OS2 World Forums if you prefer forums to mailing lists. Those are just 4 off the top of my head that will help you learn how to use an operating system. And the OS2 operating system, family of operating systems. If you don't know how to turn the computer on, that's also not something that ArcaOS can help you do. The bug tracker is great, but if you open a ticket that says, I can't get my computer to turn on, we're going to tell you that you should contact the manufacturer of your computer and find out how to turn it on. Because that's not something, we don't sell hardware, we don't necessarily even recommend hardware. We tell you the hardware that we've tested that we've found to be compatible and not compatible in certain instances. And we tell you that you're more than welcome to try the software on whatever hardware you may have. Here are the basic guidelines. But if you don't know how to use that hardware, that is not something that falls under the purview of ArcaOS.
You mean you can't tell me how to put the battery in?
There you go. There you go. And we can't act as a substitute for reading documentation. If you download a program from Hobbs that sounds really, really great, please don't open a ticket for us to help you learn how to use that application. Read the documentation that came with the application, or use one of those other third parties for user-to-user help and say, I downloaded this application, it was written in 1991 by a fellow, and his email address was at genie.com, the General Electric Network for Information Exchange. And I found a CompuServe address for him, but my email bounced back to me. Could someone tell me how I'm supposed to install this software? Well, for God's sakes, is there a README in the package? I mean, try to do the basics. Bring to us at ArcaNoe issues that you have with ArcaOS. If the operating system is not behaving properly to your expectations, by all means open a ticket for us. But asking us user-to-user questions like, how do I use this software that I downloaded from XYZ website that was written in 1991, I don't know how to use it. If I don't have it, I don't know how to use it. I'm going to tell you exactly what I would do. I would look for a README file in the zip. That's kind of what it is. And I don't mean that to be snarky in any sense of the word. And all that I'm saying is there are boundaries as to what we can realistically focus our attention on doing. There are some who believe that we have very little regard for personal users, and that could not be farther from the truth. We spend a lot of time with our enterprise clients because enterprise clients not only pay the bills, not only do they do that, but they're very demanding of our time because typically their problems affect many, many, many users. So when they have a problem and their ArcaOS subsystem, ArcaOS infrastructure is not working right, we really do have to prioritize that. And that's what they pay us to do. The flip side of the coin is that new development that comes out of those types of support contracts benefits everyone. The amount of work that went into getting Samba 4, the Samba 4 client running in a stable fashion was all bootstrapped by a large enterprise client. And that really funded Paul's work, and Paul wasn't the only one. It funded work for a number of us on that project. And as a result, we all have Samba 4 as a client in ArcaOS. We might not have had it certainly as soon as we got it, had that not been the case. So please don't ever think that we forsake our personal users for our enterprise customers. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. So here's the plan for 5.1. How am I doing on time, Mark?
You have like 20 minutes.
Okay. So 5.1 obviously is the 5.10 is the current release. That's English only. We are wrapping up 5.11 for release. Obviously, we'll have an English 5.11, and it looks today like we will have German, Spanish, and Russian for 5.11. Other languages are planned to follow as they reach the point of at least enough completion that they won't embarrass us. There's nothing more embarrassing with an NLV than having half the operating system translated and the other half being in English. As those other languages get finished, they'll be added to the next releases. So we won't do a 5.11 Italian if Italian isn't ready to be released when 5.11 comes out. Italian would then, if it's ready for release, wait until we release 5.12. And we might release 5.12 sooner or later, depending upon the status of the other pieces that that we want to get into. The main points in 5.1.1 support for a wider range of currently shipping hardware. And we do that through updates to the UEFI loader and updated drivers for various things. We've enhanced the capability in the installation volume manager for GPT volumes. It's still not quite where we want it to be, but it's a work in progress, and there's no sense holding back the release for further updates at this time, but it will continue to evolve. It's getting better. Obviously, latest drivers, updates to the installer. Again, we have to release an ISO when there's an update to something that's not individually installable, like the ArcaOS installer itself. So we have updated the installer from 5.1.0. There are some changes in it for 5.1.1. And utilities that we use during the installation have been updated. The font scalability that we've talked about for probably a couple of years now. Many of the components that we ship with ArcaOS are font scalable now. Or I should say, Alex is out of the room, but they're aware of font scalability. The new VNC server and client from Digi is in the 5.1.1 release. It's Ultra VNC compatible, and it's very nice. It's a big improvement over the older tight VNC based server and client that we had before, that we have currently.
What version it's going to be?
What version of Digi's?
I tried the VNC client today, and it was 2, I think. And I had a VNC server running on this Raspberry, and it's complained that the versions were too different or something. I think it was VNC.
I'd have to look and see which VNC client you're using.
Or maybe it was RDP. Maybe
That sounds more like it, RDP. Andre just released an update for VNC last week. One of our holdups was that Andre's builds are all for Pentium 4, and they require Pentium 4 libraries. And we found an issue running that on a system that was configured for i686. So we have the source code and had to build the i686 package for it. So now that he's just updated it again as of last week, we have to update the package again before release. But they will be the latest available, or close to the latest available VNC packages.
And that will be in ANPM. I can get it there.
His stuff is distributed by Zip Warpin from his site, but in ArcaOS it would be part of the ArcaOS installation.
Oh, okay. But what about an existing installation of
An existing installation, you can go to his website right now and download.
On that list of all the things that we need
It
to know.
will be on the list. I'll go over that tomorrow, and I'll add that to the list. But the i686 version of that you can expect to download from the ArcaNoe repositories. I went to the. There we go. So more hardware support. Obviously, if you can't boot the machine, not much else matters, right? So people are always after us for, when are you going to support this network driver? When are you going to support Wi-Fi? Well, can we get the machine booting first? Let's make sure we can get it booted, because if we can't boot it, supporting every network driver on the planet really doesn't much matter, now does it? So I'm just discussing here the way we prioritize our driver updates and our new driver releases. Obviously, the latest hardware does pose challenges for OS2 because it has certain expectations, being an operating system of the 1990s. And we have to work around those expectations. Now, sometimes we work around those expectations by rebuilding a driver so that it no longer has those expectations, such as the keyboard driver that no longer expects that there's going to be an 8042 controller available. Sometimes what we have to do, such as we essentially do for UEFI, is we provide an environment that most closely resembles the environment that OS2 is expecting, so that it is unaware that the system on which it's actually running is different, is non-standard. So we are able to do that under UEFI. That's the ArcaOS compatibility system, ANCS. So that's the UEFI support that we have. We like to call it a compatibility system because ArcaOS is not a UEFI aware operating system. ANCS provides the UEFI layer that we would require, but ArcaOS itself, that's why it's the same DVD, whether you're installing on an older ThinkPad like my T43 over there, or on a newer one like this T590 under UEFI. ArcaOS is exactly the same. There's no difference. Once ArcaOS itself starts to boot, once the handoff is made from UEFI to OS2, it's the same ArcaOS. It's the same kernel on both systems.
Is that the ANCS, I assume, is a series of drivers or DLLs?
It's a series of 64-bit applications that are installed on the ESP, the EFI system partition. So there is what we call the UEFI loader. Okay. And are there actually DLLs in the loader binary that are unpacked? I don't think there are DLLs in there.
There might be some, like BVH-EFI is a DLL, if
That's true,
considered
BVH,
part of it,
yeah. So the base video handler is different for UEFI. That's one thing that's
It's all in
different.
the loader?
It's not all in the loader, but the base video handler, I mean, that is a difference between a traditional BIOS system like my T43 and this system here running under UEFI, the base video handler. So the base video handler is what talks to the video hardware itself. So we have a new base video handler for UEFI called BVH-EFI. And that is how the system talks to what it believes to be the video BIOS. David is probably going to correct me on that because I know that I said that incorrectly. And I apologize now. But that's the low-level video driver. So it's different. On the other machine, it's BVH VGA.
Yes.
Right. But that's part of the compatibility system. On the ESP are all the 64-bit components. So the loader that boots, that's 64-bit. That's not OS2 executable code. That's UEFI executable code. So all of that is part of the compatibility system.
And that's all contained in that small UEFI partition?
That fat partition, yeah.
Okay, none of it is in the actual...
The only components for ANCS that are in the ArcaOS system partition itself would be that base video handler.
Okay.
As far as I can think off the top of my head.
Yeah, and as far as I'm aware, and that's not to say there may not at some point be a couple of others like it that do similar things for different areas, but yeah, basically those are the interface between the active ArcaOS system and the special UEFI program that lives in the UEFI area. And if you're worried about getting this wrong, I'm probably completely screwing up the technical details. But you can kind of think of, I guess you can kind of think of it as something that lives in the UEFI space.
Yeah.
As an agent, kind of, that certain parts of the operating system talk through instead of talking directly to the classic BIOS, which isn't actually there. And that layer would then translate what the operating system expects and is sending it to the actual UEFI BIOS where needed, or emulating its own replacement as needed. It's very clever. I don't pretend to understand half of how it works because I'm not the genius who wrote it, but it's, yeah.
And neither am I. Neither am I. But that compatibility system is what makes ArcaOS compatible with UEFI systems. That's the thing to remember. That's just another suite of components that ships with ArcaOS 5.1. And that will continue to get enhanced as time goes on. GPT is obviously new for OS 2 because we've only had master boot record partitioning available to us before. The rule of thumb about GPT is use it if you need to use it. If you don't need to use it, don't use it. If ArcaOS is the only system on your disk, there's no reason to use GPT. There really isn't. It adds another layer because it goes through a filter driver, so it will impact your disk performance. But the flip side is if you have a disk that's been partitioned by Windows with megabyte partition boundaries, then GPT works beautifully because that works fine for us. We don't care.
Sorry.
No, what
I
were you
believe it
saying?
will also let you use disks bigger than 2 terabytes.
It will allow you to use disks bigger than 2 terabytes, yes. So if you have a 4 terabyte device that you want to access and carve up, you can carve that up using GPT partitions. No GPT partition for ArcaOS may exceed 2 terabytes. No single partition. But if you have an 8 terabyte drive, you could carve that into 4 2 terabyte GPTs. Or more GPTs that are smaller. Or what I should say is more GUID partitions that are smaller, to be accurate, because GPT is a partition table by definition. Driver and installer updates. AMOuse has been vastly improved. It used to be that for ThinkPad devices, we recommended using the IBM single mouse driver because it handled the track point more consistently across ThinkPad versions. And it did some other things that were more compatible with TrackPoint and trackpad devices. David has really done a wonderful job of reworking AMOuse. The latest AMOuse works very well for ThinkPads. So there's really not a lot of need to use the IBM single mouse driver unless there's a feature that you really want, like magnifying and stuff like that that comes with the IBM driver. The USB A6 driver has been fixed and has been released. That was not working for a number of devices. That's fixed. That's an Ethernet adapter for USB. And David continues his work to improve the USB stack, which is working very well these days. The stick creation utility, when you, not the image script for DFC, which really has not been altered at all, but if you create a USB stick for ArcaOS from an OS2 installation, either Warp 4 or newer, that's got USB connectivity, that script has been greatly enhanced. You don't need to eject the stick and plug it back in for it to recognize that it's been repartitioned. And there's even a brief warning note when it starts up to tell you that any indications from the removable media widget on the X Center may be ignored. You just let the script run and it will do the whole thing for you. Okay, some other updates. The installation volume manager has been updated. And again, as I said before, the GPT support in all of our tools is getting better and will continue to improve over time. And various applications have been updated. The font scalability thing has been one of Alex's big projects. He's been really immersed in that for some time. And Rich did a tremendous amount of work in X-Work. Well, the two of them together worked on the X-Workplace stuff. X-Workplace is really, it's almost a necessary add. I mean, we still treat it as an add-on to the operating system, but it really is almost a necessity to have. The multimedia classes, Greg Young has been working on updating the multimedia classes for us. One of the things that it didn't do was it didn't handle digital transfers. So if you had a modern system with, and you want to play an audio CD, and let's say that modern system did not have an internal optical drive, you have to use a USB connected optical drive, so it's using digital transfer for the audio, that CD will now play. We couldn't hear that before because you could use that with the traditional IBM OS2 Warp CD player. That would work, but not the multimedia folder CD player that comes with the multimedia classes. That all works now. It's still a work in progress, so you will see some more updates to it over time. But the version that will ship in 5.1.1 is much, much, much better than what we've had up to this point. That was essentially untouched from 5.0 through 5.1.0, and now we're getting an update to it. Python 3 we now install by default at the beginning, so you don't have to go through the pain of upgrading Python. And the neat little trick to...
I just installed 5.1.
Not 5.1.1 though.
No.
When you install 5.1.1, that whole Python 3 problem is out of the picture because we take care of that.
I was going to have a support career.
And if you do the upgrade, we handle that for you during the upgrade process.
Nice.
So,
Well, that's nice of you.
yeah. And there are more things, like more polished, like fit and finish things. Just tons of little things, minor touches. You know what happens is when we start on a new release, we have a project ticket in Mantis that is our blocker list for the next release, and we break things down into device drivers, installer, software, and the things that we want, and we all add to the list. And then as we near release, we realize, well, some things aren't going to get done. We're going to have to kick them down the road. And so those things go into the blocker ticket for the next release. And some things just keep getting kicked, and some things fall off that list along the way when we decide, well, we're just not going to do that. There's no real reason to do that. Time. How am I doing on time?
20 minutes.
So these are planned features not promised features, but planned features. The Samba 4 server is mostly working at this point. I think that Paul has some work to do to get the latest releases working the way we want them to be working. One of the holdups with the Samba 4 server was deciding whether we were going to replace the GUI configuration utility, or whether we were going to remove the GUI configuration utility, or whether we were going to keep that and just change the underlying Samba version. We still haven't made all those choices yet, because we're not yet close enough to adding the Samba 4 server to the distribution. Alex has talked about a new rewritten printer manager for some time, but he's not sure whether he wants to be the one to do it. Is that an accurate
It's
statement?
pretty sure that I'm not going to be the one to do it. Not as I envisaged it. Because I envisaged it as essentially using workplace shell classes. And while I have many talents, workplace shell programming is not one of them.
So that may be something that we engage someone to do that work. But it's right now we have a suite of printer creation and management utilities that seem to work fairly well. We get very few complaints about them, and this isn't working the way I expected. Those things don't crop up all that often. They crop up from time to time, but we'll see. So that's on the list for sometime after the 5.1.1 release. We'll see whether we get to it sooner or later. Alex mentioned before about the desktop notebook background page supporting changing of wallpapers on a scheduled basis, and there are some other things that we wanted to address because it has some interesting warts on it that have been inherited over time. So that's one of those things that we want to fix. David is working on a new multi-Mac driver for a newer class of Intel networking chips. That's probably the one that you have in there. And he is actively working on that. So that will be coming sometime after the 5.1.1 release. I couldn't say how soon after, but when it's available, it'll be a subscription download.
When's the 5.1.1 release? We don't know.
Very soon. The real holdup at this point is the finishing touches on the NLVs, German in particular. And we've made some decent progress in that regard recently. So soon, very soon. Certainly, we plan to release 5.1.1 before the end of the year.
This year.
Soon.
Yes, before the end of this year. That's the way things are looking right now. It hinges on a number of things falling into place. I don't want to anger the Germans by releasing 5.1.1 without a German version. But we're close. I mean, everything is really getting close to that point now. So we want to improve the iNet config settings. Remember that the default iNet config settings we inherited from OS2 Warp 4 in the days of dial-up. So the network tuning out of the box is suboptimal. So we'd like to make that better than what it is currently without breaking anything. And that, of course, is the hard part, because the defaults that are there now are safe and they work. They're not stellar for performance, but I don't want to increase the performance at the expense of connectivity. I mean, I know how I set up iNet config, and it works in the networks that I support. But I don't know if I were to thrust those on anyone else that they would be the best things to use.
What's iNet config?
iNet config is what tunes your TCP/IP stack.
Under, without me knowing. Is that right? It does it without my being aware and having to intervene?
It runs automatically on startup, TCP/IP startup.
Yeah.
Oh,
Although,
that thing that
yeah.
you see a message from,
There's a time synchronization message.
it's working or something, yeah. Okay, all right.
What-
not the time synchronization.
Not the time synchronization
I think
message.
it runs from d4tcp.cmd, which is called by tcpstart.cmd, which in turn I think runs from the startup folder. It's part of that little icon that appears on your desktop, TCP/IP initialization, I think it is. That happens in there.
And when there's an inet config.ini file in your etc. directory, it will overwrite its hard-coded defaults with the settings in that file. When you make changes and then you save those changes, it updates that inetconfig.ini file, and the next time the system reboots, it reads those last changes back in to tune the stack. The stack is very flexible in ArcaOS as it is in OS2. It's a very robust stack that we inherited from FreeBSD, or I should say from BSD, before FreeBSD.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah.
So it should be easy to port the one that supports V6 then,
I've tried to make that point to Steve Levine, and he gets a chuckle out of it every time I say that. System-wide Squid proxy and Privoxy, that's another thing that's sort of on the list, and that kind of falls into my wheelhouse to do, and I just haven't done it yet. I use a chained proxy myself between Squid and Privoxy to both anonymize my web browsing and improve my web browsing performance, and my ability to render pages that might not otherwise render properly under CMonkey 235.
What are those things?
But Squid and yeah.
Squid is a web proxy engine. So what happens with Squid is when you make a request to the internet, you actually make a request of Squid over port 3128 by default to fetch that page from the internet and bring it back. And Squid then goes out to the internet, requests the page, brings it back, hands it off to the browser to render. And you can use the proxy for other things besides your web browser.
And why would you do that?
To increase performance and compatibility. There are certain things that you can read that Squid will read and hand back to the browser in an intelligible fashion that the browser might otherwise not be able to properly interpret and render.
So it's a translator, sort of.
There's a term for it, and it's not coming to me now.
It's like an intermediary between.
Yeah, it's just a layer in between your web browser and the internet.
And does it understand the, low IQ of the OS2 web browsers, and it removes stuff that might cause them trouble? Doesn't do that, does it?
No, well, Privoxy would do that. Privoxy anonymizes your request, so it removes things that might cause you trouble, like malicious ads that have JavaScript embedded in them,
No, like
which might hang the browser.
JavaScript that's too recent to run.
Squid proxy will handle some of that stuff and filter it out for you. But it's essentially a fetching engine. I'll put it to you that way.
Okay.
And when you land on a web page, Squid can start fetching and caching those links on the page in the background for you before you click on any of them. So when you click on a link, that
It's already prefetched.
that prefetch page has already been cached in Squid's cache.
Don't some browsers do that already?
Sure they do, but not as effectively as Squid does it.
All right.
Squid is designed from the ground up to only do that. So, as I say, I use it personally. I use Squid chained to Privoxy, the two of them together. And it does a very good job for me, but the configuration is a bear. So we need to have some way to reliably configure it. And there is tweaking that people will have to do for themselves if they wanted to do more than just the very, very, very basic stuff.
And Privoxy does.
Privoxy is an anonymizing web proxy. So what Privoxy does is any data that goes out in your request that might tell people where you are, who you are, any other private information that the browser would just dumbly send through on a request, Privoxy filters out. When ads come back on a web page, Privoxy will block them out. So since you can embed bad code in image files, Privoxy will detect from various sites and on a list what it should filter out and not hand back to the browser. So it hands back a placeholder, blurry image, and you know, oh, that's an ad that Privoxy blocked. And you can tell Privoxy not to block ads from that site and make an exception. That's fairly easy to do. But as a result, not only do pages load faster, because again, you've got Squid pulling the stuff in sooner, and then you've got Privoxy only handing off the stuff that you really want to see. So it does improve your web browsing experience.
So you just end up with text pages?
But not for Chase Bank.
An updated Clock 01 sys driver is currently in the design phase. David can speak more about that. He's not speaking at this year's Warpstock, but it's a timer. And support for touchpad devices. We found a lot of, maybe not a lot is not the word, but we found a number of new laptops with touchpads. The touchpads are connected to the system using the I2C bus, not the USB bus. And we have no way to talk to them right now. No way whatsoever. So David is considering how to implement an I2C bus driver so that we can handle those touchpad devices. Obviously more WLAN drivers. We do hear you. Everyone wants WLAN. No one wants to carry around a dongle or, like one of these little travel routers and whatnot. Although they work just fine and it's not causing me any great problems. And thanks again for the loaner, Alex. I appreciate it. DT Audio, that's an essential part of our gaming-focused release. Digital transfer audio with a virtual sound blaster driver to satisfy those DOS and Win3 applications, so that we finally get sound under UniAud from those things. And as I say, that's why it's positioned there above the retro gaming release. That is one of the things that's on our list. Because we realize there is a tremendous vertical market for that. Retro computing is becoming a real thing. And since ArcaOS itself is not a retro operating system, and does not need to be resurrected in any form or fashion. The plan is that now that we have, again, real support for DOS and WinOS 2, with a couple more pieces added into that, like sound and joystick support, we could become a decent retro gaming platform. And that's that. And how much more time do I have?
20 minutes.
Any questions about anything coming up on ArcaOS?
Okay.
Mark.
When you start your presentation, I say bloodbath as a joke, but you started one with your third slide on the chat.
Did I with my third slide?
There are people that think that ArcaOS should support a new browser, Yeah, I cannot read all the stuff that
You
was put
mean-
there. It's too much.
Okay, they think that we should.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly? That we should develop another browser
Or
ourselves?
support in a more visible way the development of a modern browser for ArcaOS.
Moral
They
support?
Support in a more visible way. Okay.
Just to say, well, or develop it yourself, Arcanoa, directly, but
It's literally not feasible for
No, no.
ArcaOS to develop a browser by ourselves.
But they think that the discussions think that a browser is like important
An essential part of the
essential
operating
part
system.
of the operating system. And
Thank you, Windows 95. Before that, it was not an
yeah,
essential part of the
but for
operating system.
today, I think it's also important component. And then, for example, like the watching YouTube, watching video, and other things. So that is like a little part of a huge part of the discussion, and started that way. And then there are some other questions.
We
like,
greatly support Paul's work in porting Qt6 and getting us, and Dave Yo is involved in this also, getting us a Qt6 based browser. We greatly support their efforts and will provide whatever backup support they need in their efforts to do so.
Okay, that's good.
Can you just elaborate along what the state of it is, if you know? Like,
I've been following the thread on OS2 World like everyone else. I am not running it myself. I've not installed the latest Qt6 build, and I haven't installed the latest Double builds. The Double builds that I have running under Qt5 are terribly unstable. They don't run for more than 5 minutes at a time.
is there a way to get the things he's working on periodically, or?
Yeah, if you, so
There's another one for the list, like.
it will be
where-
on the list. It will be on the list. There's a thread in the OS2 World forums where Paul posts his progress as he's working on these things and links to download the latest packages,
Okay.
zip packages of Qt6, and he and Dave also post links to where you can download the latest, each of their latest builds of the Double browser or simple browser to run on the Qt6 web rendering platform.
So we could try it out then.
Exactly, and participate by adding feedback in
Okay.
that forum as to what works, what doesn't work.
Is that where, like Paul, like I've been using the Apache and PHP, the
Yes.
current ones,
Mm-hmm.
and they really seem to work without a problem.
Yes,
But I read somewhere that he'd like to hear about that, so how would
he
I
would
do
like to hear about that. Yes.
Okay, so do I put something in I find this forum on OS2 World, and I put a comment in there, is that how?
Well, there are a couple things you can do. You can go to the ArcaOS store and you go to the support product category,
Uh-huh.
and you
Apply.
find Paul's support page, and you send Paul some
Money.
good old American greenbacks to help him in Australia. Of course, I have to feed those into the copy machine so they come out in Australian dollars on the other end.
And it adds the
Upside down.
Trump image also,
Exactly, and it puts the Trump image on it.
and it's all $2 bills.
They're all $2 bills, fresh, crisp $2 bills.
So when you do, cough up for a support unit?
Yes.
Whatever it's called, is there a way to attach to that a comment? Or are the comments best put in the OS?
The comments are best put into the OS2 World forum,
Okay,
or one of the other places where Paul is subscribed.
I actually had a few suggestions for him about Apache in particular, because there's a lot of the settings that really should be changed to what will work.
Sure,
Like all
sure.
those modules.
Well, Paul maintains his own Mantis installation, and you can open a ticket for him in his Mantis
Okay. Let him know
for
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
What's Mantis?
That's the bug tracker, like what we run for ArcaOS,
Oh, okay.
the Mantis bug tracker.
And his is in the same place yours is?
No, his runs on his server. So there's a different address for that.
So something for the list.
Something for the list.
Okay.
And then you can, I mean, if you have suggestions for what should go into the default configuration file, post it there and
Yeah,
Paul
yeah,
will consider
definitely.
it. Yeah.
Okay, between,
Oh.
so-
So I have a bit of a two-part question. So my first part is kind of more from an advertising perspective. Has there been any form of outreach to maybe tech YouTubers or things? I know it's, you know,
No,
just to kind of
there
get-
hasn't. And I would love to be able to do that kind of outreach.
Okay, I just figured just because, you know, trying to capitalize on sort of that newer form of media that might help sort of broaden the scope of the reach that
Sure,
us can
sure.
see. And then my second comment and really question is, I know eComStation at one point, and again, different company, different strategy, different license agreements, I know all that, but they
Mhm.
used to have a demo CD, and I know that that's not something that ArcaOS can do today, but perhaps there could be some way we could do. I remember Microsoft did this ages ago for Windows 95 prior to its release. They had a Windows 95 tour.
There
you could
is
install.
a really good joke about that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it involves the I don't want to mention this person by name, but he was a person who said that in the 1990s OS2 would be the platform for the 90s. I don't want to mention him by name, but it
He
involves
currently runs a charitable foundation.
involves him reaching the afterlife and paying for that tour, and how closely it resembled the actual product. But so you're thinking that something like an overview that we could give out that wouldn't necessarily process files like an actual operating system,
Right,
but
and
would
they
be
have some level of interactivity. It doesn't have to like do anything, but like you click on a button and it kind of shows you how the windows could work. and
like the
different-
dancing elephant.
Well,
Like-
Ubuntu-
like the
Ubuntu
tutor.
has a live CD, you can just boot it up, and you can either install it or just use it.
Well, technically,
Right,
so
but
does
that would
ArcaOS.
require actual IBM code.
And that's the problem,
That's the
because
problem.
our license, our ASL with IBM, and would specifically require us to chew up one of our warehouse licenses for every one of those demos that went out. And that is the reason why we don't do demos. Right there. That's the reason we don't do demos. Now, I don't know how Serenity Systems worked out that deal with IBM so that they could actually stuff a disk in the magazine to send out to people. There were certain restrictions, like you couldn't print from it, and you couldn't use it to install the operating system. But we don't have any of that in our agreement with IBM. So it becomes problematic for us. But a semi-interactive movie highlighting features of ArcaOS would not only be something we could look at doing, but something that could be done completely online.
Right, I was thinking something akin to like, this would be a good 90s reference, like Macromedia Director. You know, something how that you could do like a visual, like you can click around. It obviously wasn't the software, but a lot of educational programs back
Right.
in the day did demos like that.
Right,
So,
right.
just a,
Excellent idea. And yes, I will take that to heart.
there are another question about the Java version, if there's any plan to improve the Java version.
Okay, so let me just answer this before I get to you guys. Early on in the life of ArcaOS, before there was an ArcaOS, we supported a project to port Java 8, Java 1.8 to OS2. And we financially supported that project. And it went absolutely nowhere. And after a certain amount of months of providing funding, we pulled the plug on it. To date, we have not had another developer step forward and say, I would love to work on porting Open Java to ArcaOS. We would welcome the opportunity to work with someone who expressed such an interest and had the chops to do it. Again, that's a project that is too large for us to do in-house with our current team. We are too focused on the operating system itself. It would be wonderful to have a new Java, and it's on my personal wish list. But the fact that it's on my personal wish list, there are a lot of things on my personal wish list that may never see the light of day. I would love to see an SAS driver for servers.
Serial attached SCSI?
Serial attached SCSI. We don't have a driver for those servers right now.
What's Java written in C or what? Do you have any idea?
OpenJDK, as far as I know, is still C. It's not written in Rust.
You're right.
It's still C. So it would be buildable, but there's a lot to building it. I mean, it's a pretty big project. But as I say, it's on my personal wish list, just like an SAS driver is on my personal wish list.
And would it be like the version 6, which uses that Windows layer to allow the Java to work, or would it be a native port?
It would depend upon who was doing the work. I mean, my preference would be for a native port,
Sure.
but there were reasons that Java 1.6 was done the way it was done. One of the reasons was the speed at which it could have been done, doing it that way and being able to reuse Windows code,
Right.
versus doing it the way Golden Code did 1.4.2 and making a native port of Java. As I say, we would welcome the opportunity for someone to step forward and say, I want to do Java and I can do it, and we would enter into some discussions as to how we can support those
Are
efforts.
those guys still alive, those Golden Code guys?
I don't know. I really don't know. I haven't spoken to those guys in years and years and years. Doug, you had something to.
Do you know who did the VBox port to OS2? The host part?
As far as I know, Canute did that work originally. That was VirtualBox was an Initech project.
Yeah, but the VBox 5, I think, that now runs on OS2, I think is done by Russia.
Oh, the VBox host that of VBox, right? VirtualBox 5 host was done by
Valerie?
no, it was
Valerie
done.
recompiled it, yeah.
It was done by
I thought it was the same guy that did remote desktop. But I couldn't remember.
no. It's going to come up on IRC, and why I don't know why his name is
I
escaping
think
me
it was
right now.
done by the same guy who does that other kernel-related project that we don't talk about.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
yes.
The reason I'm asking is, and I may have asked this before and forgotten the answer, what's the likelihood of doing like Windows 7 32-bit and a VBox on ArcaOS and running a browser in that?
I would say it's probably more useful to run a Linux version.
Yeah, what I have
Okay,
typically.
for a Linux version.
What I've typically done for clients who have had a need to run a newer browser is to use the older, lighter VirtualBox 1.6 that I think Paul ported that one over, and run a very slim Linux distribution in that, and then install a modern browser in Linux on that.
And does that work?
Yeah, works fine. I mean, within limits, because obviously you're not able to use a lot of RAM for what you do, because ArcaOS itself is limited to 4 gigs,
Yeah.
and you're going to carve up some of that for the VM. The VM's not going to get 4 gigs to use. So there are some limitations, but it'll render. It'll render. So sure, that.
There's another nifty project that somebody was posting about on OS2 World a couple months ago, where if you have another system or possibly a VM, there's another type of like proxy server that runs that actually will download web pages and render them as images and send those to your OS2 web browser, and it will pass clicks and things through, and it works pretty seamlessly. But the downside is you need another system, either in a VM or on another box, to run that proxy server on.
So it won't
I think
work
it
on
has to be a
laptop.
64-bit system. So
Could you make like a short recipe on how to do, you said VBox 1.6
Yeah.
and a suggested Linux distro? Put it down?
Yeah,
I could probably come up
know
with
the
I could probably
distro
come up
for
with
that better
something
than I
to
would.
do that. I haven't done it in a while, but I can add it to my list. There's no promise as to when I'll have that ready, but
Okay.
I'll throw it back in the hopper and see if I can come up with
I
something.
mean, just a, if nothing else, just a description
Sure.
of what it is or what it gets.
And of course, the other thing to do is that if you're running ArcaOS virtualized,
Then you just use the.
then you run the if you're running on a secure host, like a Linux-based host, 64-bit, then you can run the browser on that, and then, you know.
Also, I ran Ubuntu with VirtualBox with 2 displays, and then you have your OS2 and display by itself. Really nice.
Sure. That works. Jeff, you had a comment to make, or a question?
Well, a question, going back to a discussion we had last year, and then some private correspondence we had about the 64-bit issue. So
Mhm.
people have been giving me some computers with 64-bit OSs, but right away I can't use them because my software won't run on some of my software.
You need to run WordStar, and you can't run
And there are
WordStar.
other things, I got over. So as I see it now, we will gradually become extinct because everything's going to 64-bit and the hardware and the software, and you said there's a way to do it, which is a translation table to make ArcaOS a 64-bit system, to see 64-bit systems. but
I
if
said
you weren't
that?
gonna do that, I could go back and.
That was
send
after
emails
the
back
second
to you.
drink lesson.
That doesn't seem
It was a
like
lot of fun after that.
that doesn't seem like something I would have said exactly that way.
Okay, so but.
First of all, there are a couple problems with 64-bit,
Yeah,
okay?
totally.
So first of all, at some point in time in the future, Intel processors will no longer execute 32-bit code. That's going to be a problem for us. Now, if we can work around that in software, such as what we do with with ANCS now, which boots UEFI 64-bit, and then provides a 32-bit, something we can boot 32-bit. I don't know. That's well beyond my area of expertise. I'm the LAN guy.
In theory, that's essentially how a Type 1 hypervisor works. If you stripped it down to the core, took out all of the options of like managing.
You virtualize the core.
You basically have a kernel.
Right.
That's a hardware level hypervisor.
Right.
And then integrate that into the system. You essentially have that.
So that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. So theoretically, that would be the workaround, is to move more of what we do in the actual hardware now into the software layer on top of that. As far as a 64-bit ArcaOS, never going to happen. The kernel is never going to be rewritten in 64-bit. And if it were, we have no applications that run on 64-bit OS2 and no compiler that could compile supposed 64-bit OS2 code. So you have a multi-tiered problem trying to make OS2 64 bits.
I was just thinking about the future.
And I'm just, this is a question that we get on a regular basis. And I'm trying to make it clear for those watching this video in perpetuity and those online watching now that it's simply not feasible. If we were IBM, I might have a different answer for you. If we had 1,000 developers to throw at the problem, I'm sure that we could rewrite the entire kernel and all the utilities and the workplace shell in 64 bits.
And then all of the applications from the 1990s that everybody likes to use probably still would not work on it. Because they're compiled for
There is that problem. There is that problem. Those would still need to be virtualized in some form or fashion in order to run in such an environment.
Every time you go to download software, it says, for other operators, it will ask you, do you want the 32-bit version or the 64-bit version? There's a reason they're different, because they are fundamentally for different operating systems.
Mm-hmm. And you can install both a 64-bit Java and a 32-bit Java on the same machine. They're two entirely different systems, subsystems.
I mean, the likelihood that the hardware is going to eliminate that anytime soon is probably not high.
I didn't say anytime soon. Eventually.
Yeah, but
Is that going to be 20 years from now?
well, he and I are still alive.
I got
Well-
another 20 years. I'm 20 years ahead.
Okay.
I'm the last one. I bought my last cars now. I got my last computers.
Now, well, I want you to think about it.
You're going to be buried in?
I want you to think about it like this. So if in 20 years from today, Intel announces we are going to orphan all 32-bit capable processors by December 31 of 2044.
Oh,
I'm not saying they said this. I'm not saying they said this. Please don't.
it was just
on the
it was
record
hype.
now.
It was just
It was here.
If-
It was Rosenthal.
If they were to say that, it wouldn't stop all of the computers written up to that point and all the CPUs manufactured up until that point from functioning for another 20 to 30 years after that, or 40 years.
I drove my first car for 50 years.
Or if it, my 63 Bonneville is 61 years old. And she runs just beautifully, thank you very much.
Well, I think the Hubble telescope still uses 386 processors, doesn't it?
Something like that, something like that.
Well,
So
the AMD also is another player
AMD is another player. I would expect that if anyone were to get out of 32-bit first, AMD would get out first. That's just my read on the...
because it's an extra headache for them. I mean, since it's already there.
Because backward compatibility has never been a real focus of theirs.
Oh, really?
Intel is more focused on backward compatibility, I think. And that's... I probably shouldn't be making statements like that on a recorded line, but...
Yeah.
But my read of the industry over the last however many years has been that Intel has been more concerned with backward compatibility in general.
Do they still manufacture?
Of course, I say that from about a company that came out with the Itanium chip that
Right.
was
Well, that was, I was thinking about that.
purely
They tried
64-bit.
that once.
Yeah.
And then it was AMD who actually came up with the backwards compatible x86.
That's true. That is very true.
So,
That is very true. So maybe I should eat those words now rather than later because they're fresher.
Do they still make 32-bit only processors?
No. The last ones were Atoms, and those were discontinued, I think, in 2017, 2018.
Oh.
Something like that. Yeah, I don't think that there are any currently manufactured.
But there are Chinese companies that have licensed to be able to manufacture, and I'm thinking it's AMD chips, older versions of.
Well, that's certainly possible. I mean, as long as the companies are willing to license them the ability to do it, and they have the plans to the blueprints to do it,
Yeah.
there's no stopping anyone from doing it then. as long as they're licensed, they would certainly be legal from what I know.
One of the things I didn't see mentioned was anything about video, because even right here, we're having trouble with HDMI doing both the laptop and the projector at the same time.
Yeah, I sort of backed away from in my recent roadmaps about talking about what we'd like to do with Snap, because what we'd like to do with Snap and what we're likely to do with Snap are really two entirely different things. We'd like to see Snap developed to support more modern chips, including the modern Intel chips. With Snap, we would be able to do stuff like that, like change the output on the fly, and zoom and multi-head and whatnot. That's not going to happen with Panorama, because Panorama doesn't do those things. And it's not like, could that be a feature added onto Panorama? No, it actually can't, because Panorama isn't a driver. In fact, Snap only does that for chipsets that it specifically supports. So the chipset support modules need to be written for Snap. And that's the way Snap was designed, to be modular like that. So yes, we would love to see support added to Snap to do that, and we do have the license for Snap. So that would fall under one of the things that would be something for ArcaOS to do. It's not our focus right now, because we're more focused on the operating system and other drivers.
If it doesn't boot, who cares what you can say?
Bingo, and that's exactly it. We were really focused for a very long time on the UEFI stuff, the ANCS, and now that we have it, we're sort of back to looking at adding more network driver support. But yeah, we would like to update Snap, because we have an investment in Snap. We didn't get that licensing for free. That cost us money, and I would love to see Snap be made more relevant, more useful to more people.
Panorama runs on top of Snap?
No, Panorama runs.
It's a Visa driver, right?
Yeah, exactly. Panorama's a Visa driver. That's all that it does. So it doesn't do things like, it doesn't do BIOS level things like switching your video output from one place to the other and doing multi-head. You can't do that with Panorama. But Panorama does provide us with fairly good coverage of modern displays, so that we can at least see what's on the screen. The whole external and internal monitor thing, and multi-head and zooming, those are all nice things that we'd like to have, but at least we have something that works in the meantime.
You mean it's possible that OS2 could handle multiple displays?
Sure, Snap handles multiple
It does
displays.
Snap.
If you have a chipset supported by Snap, if you have an ATI Radeon X300, the chip that I have in my T43 is supported by Snap. And I can do multi-head, and I can do zooming, and I can do,
Oh, really? Like I have AMD, a couple of boxes at home, and that's ATI, right?
That's ATI, and ATI is AMD now.
Yeah, so is that the same, or it's like a different chipset?
It depends upon the chipset. I mean, they don't support all ATI chipsets. Snap supports ATI chipsets that were current around the time that it was released. So
Like 20 years ago.
it's getting dated. It's getting dated.
How easy is it to swap in ArcaOS between Snap and Panorama?
In ArcaOS, it's very simple to swap between Snap and Panorama now.
Okay.
You run the Snap installer, and it will change you from Panorama to Snap. You run the Panorama installer, and it will go the other direction. That's definitely not a problem.
Does Snap stop you if the chipset isn't supported?
No, Snap will fall back to Grad.
Oh, I see.
There are some components that are common between IBM Grad, Panorama, and Snap. The Grad components, because they're all Grad drivers. But Snap has the capability of driving actual chipsets of which it's aware. But writing the modules for those chipsets is not a trivial task. There are only a couple people, 3 people I can think of off the top of my head who can do that right now. Doesn't mean that more people can't learn to do it. I mean, it's not impossible. We have plenty of documentation on it, but we haven't made that commitment yet. We haven't had someone say to us, "I really, 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 really want to work on Snap." Because if we did, then we would sit up and say, "Well, that's great. Let's see what we can do to help you work on Snap, and we'd love to work out a deal with you so you could work on Snap for us." Other questions? Because now I know that I don't have 20 minutes left. Anyone?
Just to tell people that do not worry about 64 bits, because in 20 years we're going to ask the AI that generate a 64 bit
And you know,
and give it to us.
that mention of 64 bits in 20 years, realize in 20 years we'll have 128-bit
Yeah.
chips.
Quantum computers.
Quantum computers, exactly.
Then that 64-bit layer that you developed will be obsolete.
See, exactly. And when we have quantum computing, we can just go back in time and do it all over again.
Tell IBM not to make mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, that's it then. That's it then. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we have a few minutes?
Yeah.